Hello, hello. How's it going, everybody? That makes me happy every time. We're back to a little bit of local first. So what we are doing here is going through a library called Loro, and I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. It is a CRDT local first library. Um, you can kind of group many or all of the CRDTs into the banner of local first, but it's not like inherently required to do local first, if that makes sense. It's just that all the things that the CRDTs enable make for a good local first dev experience. Now, what's interesting about this is it's built in the API surface is sort of in the fashion of other libraries like YJS or AutoMerge, but it has some other additional interesting features, and it's written in Rust. It's pretty fast. Their benchmarks point to it being quite performant. So we're going to kind of dig into everything. I imagine we're going to have very similar feelings about this library compared to some of the other ones that we've done on stream. But I'm interested to see like where it stands out. So let's dig into that. I'm gonna pop right over to this. I was working really, really hard. So close, so close. We did this on stream the past, I guess, few streams. We've been going through and updating the. I mean, honestly, this has been on stream for like 6 or 8 streams now. But the last few, we made some swaps. It has some file system hooks and the Tory state, or excuse me, the Tory store plugin to make it a little bit more user focused for what we're specifically using it for, which is I'm making a to-do list for the stream, and I want to hook it into potentially that data, but then also save it out in a way where it's useful for, say, making chapter markers. We almost had it done last stream. I added a little bit more niceties on top, which you might notice. I went to build this morning and it didn't build. I forgot to do it. It appears that I forgot to fix the tray icon. So you need to generate an icon to use in the system tray, and I did not do that. It just magically works in local dev, but when you build the thing, it failed, which is unfortunate. So we're running off dev, but it's fine. We'll come back to that probably next week and finish some of those bits off if I don't otherwise finish it. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through Loro. There's a few things that I kind of want to dive into. I think I do want to make a. I guess we'll say a quick example app. We'll probably like spin up Vite or something. I got way too much stuff on my desk here to have this feel nice. We'll do. I want to check out they specifically as like the first bullet point square feature thing. They say high performance, so I want to look into the performance claims. We want to check out the Loro ecosystem. I think that's probably one of the places where it is not going to be as strong, just because it hasn't, as far as I can tell, it's only been around for a few years. They just went 1.0, as you can see here. It is. It looks to be at least a few years old, though. So I don't know like how much. I mean, we can kind of like check that out too as we're looking through the ecosystem stuff, but like it just hasn't been around as long as like YJS, and I think I would probably say that a YJS has the most robust ecosystem around it, um, for better or worse. I guess we want to check out the CRDT type options. If you haven't looked at or seen CRDTs in the wild yet, CRDT stands for conflict free, or R, conflict. Uh, Golly, what does it stand for now? Data type. Data type is the last part. Conflict. They don't actually say it anywhere, do they? What is that? What is the R? Replication. Conflict free. The dash threw me off. Conflict free replicated data type. Replicated? Sure. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, the dash threw me off. I was like, wait a minute, where'd the F go? CRDT stands for conflict free replicated data type. And the idea is that it's a way to determine when you have multiple states, how do you merge them together? This is less important when you have one central authority. So think a database. When you're doing functions in your app, what you have in your app doesn't actually matter to other people that are also grabbing the same data set until you push it up and get it in that central store. So your database is going to be the thing that says, yes, this is good. I'm going to accept this as a value. Now everybody else can grab it. And yeah, coalesce. So it's your with CRDTs, it flips the model a little bit where you don't necessarily have to have a central authority. There are still some models that use some like local first libraries that use that model for one reason or another. But what it's doing is it's taking state from multiple places and potentially multiple having occurred in multiple times and trying to put them all into a single data set. So if you have in the models that you still use central authority, going this route still is valuable if you want to do something like offline support, because if you're working offline, you need to be able to then any changes you made locally then need to be effectively synced up. And then you need to decide which one wins. If somebody edits the exact same thing, how do you determine what wins? So CRDTs is that there's as far as I know offhand, there's a bunch of math involved that helps determine which thing wins. And there's a few ways you can go about and algorithms you can apply to that that all sort of fall under the CRDT model. So what's interesting about CRDTs is depending on how they're built, they will kind of out of the box support the offline time travel and peer-to-peer sync. Some of them don't do one versus the other depending on like what model they're reliant on. Do they say here real-time collaboration? So I guess real-time is the other little bit that is nice. I haven't really found much value in having real-time in the things that I've been doing or using it for, playing around with. But like Google Docs, the experience that you can make for somebody using your app, think when you were editing a document before to Google Docs and you can collaborate and have somebody working on it with you and see their cursor. It's like just the fact that you happen to pick in architecture and you get a whole bunch of these features is really kind of a neat thing. So we want to look at the type options. There's within YJS, because I have a feeling that this is going to be compared to YJS often. Within YJS, there's a few different structures of data that you can use. It looks like Loro has those same ones, but potentially a couple more. So that's kind of what I want to get into it. This demo looks pretty cool, and they got some like debugging stuff, or at least it's a visual. All right, so I think first things first, we're gonna look through all the docs. We might spin off a couple other to-dos from there. Then we're going to look into the performance claims and oh boy, that would be a bug. Good thing I didn't need that. Look through all the docs, look into the performance claims, CRDT type operation options, then make a quick example app. What was the last thing that I had? Is this gonna like? I thought I fixed all those. No. All right. Let's do it again. Look through the docs. That was a weird. I think it was because I dragged it at the bottom. I have the situation dragging it up to the top. I must have missed dragging it down to the bottom. That's unfortunate. Okay, so look through the docs, make a quick example. We want to check out the performance claims. We want to check on the CRDT data types. And like the dragging is a little bit weird when I don't know. I feel like the dragging is just a little bit weird with this library. The upside it wasn't terrible to implement the drag and drop. we had to deal with our own state of that. We couldn't. Long story short, I didn't end up using their state piece within React Spectrum out of the box. So I had to do my own drag and drop logic. Clearly isn't isn't completely bug free, but you know, that is what it is. What was the last thing we want to do? Look through the docs, check out the performance claims, check on the CRDT types, make a quick example app. I guess we also want to look at the feature comparison, which is a little bit in the vein of like this. So we're going to feature comparison and then that. Okay. I kind of want to look at this. Oh, it's not actually a video. I thought it was a video. This is kind of neat. You can see here, and like rich text editors are a very good example of why you'd use this piece like in your app. Because the potential for conflicts is much higher. You're sort of like working on the same thing. Somebody could highlight everything and delete it all. Like you have to have some way to handle all of that. If you're just sending up tasks and receiving tasks back, the way you need to think about and deal with it is a little bit simpler. So there's some level of like when you're selecting a library that has CRDT functionality, you're gonna have to do a little bit of future planning, but like the main idea is probably going to be around, are you editing the same chunk of text? If you're doing that, that might push you towards a certain library versus not. If you aren't doing that, I mean, there's plenty of startups or whatnot that have written their own like local first integration. Some of them did it because they needed really deep handling of these various, like document type functionality. But other ones like If you just have a bunch of records and you need to decide if we're putting in this one before this one, that is a different, very different use case. Local first is nice, but then you have to add rollback. I think what's interesting about, oh, you mean rollback like it synced and it saved in a way that somebody didn't want it to save. Yes, I think that is true. So if we have a central authority, when I submit a record to that central authority, it's going to save it in the database or not, and then give me a response back. You can check on the server and wait, or you can do the optimistic update thing where I'm assuming it's going to be fine, and I'm going to show that state in the front end in my UI as being fine, but then maybe have like a little background indicator or something. And then when it comes back and confirms that it's fine, then we, the state just reflects that. What Noor is talking about is if you go on a train ride and you don't have connection for 8 hours, and then you get back to the office after the weekend or whatever, and you connect your computer and it now has access to that document, all of those changes over 8 hours are going to sync through. What if somebody else was also working on that document? Yes, you can have some logic to decide which wins. That doesn't mean that your logic is going to actually be what was intended by either one or both of the users. So having that like state branching piece, I think, is important, and it's either going to be like the model you can kind of think of very much like Git. You want to be able to like branch off, work separately, and then be able to merge it back in, and then hit any of those points in the past if you need to. The simpler version of that is, I think, what you're kind of thinking with rollback, where you kind of have like a history of the document or an undo functionality or something like that. But like they put it right on here. It's right on the home page. I like that they're thinking about it like that. At least for the use cases that I think are interesting. Yeah. I mean, server goes down is definitely one. I think the stronger use case is probably going to be offline. So somebody's like on a train or public transport or, in Costco and connection is awful. So an example that might ring true for folks a little bit. If you make an app for recipes, you go to a store, you want that thing to be able to work locally, because sometimes the connections in those big box stores is awful. So if you have literally no connection, you want to be able to like go through your list and check things off as you buy it. When you get done and it syncs back up, that all needs to update. But what if you have two of you? I go to the store with my wife, myself and kids all come along. We're all multiple devices potentially, checking things off as we're shopping, putting it all in the cart. When we leave, we want all of that to sync up. That isn't always going to be the most straightforward, and what we would decide as far as logic goes doesn't mean that that's what the user's going to intend. So yes, I think there's lots of use cases where that's going to be a big deal. So like everything, I appreciate calling that out. There is going to be pros and cons of this. It's not like everything needs to be or should be local first. There is definitely going to be, like I was actually talking with somebody the other day. I suppose I probably shouldn't say their name, but we were talking about electric SQL and if it makes sense to bring that in, and we got through it sort of towards the end of our conversation. I was like, what I'm hearing is none of the features you care about are actually like the local first or something that electric SQL can give you. Maybe just start without it and see where things go. So this isn't like in architecture that everybody should switch to. I think has very strong use cases. My computer's locked. I think it has very strong use cases, but don't put it in everything, please. um, you just moved from electric to a custom implementation. Okay, they it it feels like there's sort of a big like shakeup. There was a whole bunch of I feel like especially last year, um, the space felt like it got a lot of attention, and we saw sort of a balloon in attention, or at least that's in the sphere I was operating in. It felt like that, and then it hit a point where everybody was like, "We see where things are starting to falter, and what potentially the next phase should look like. We're going to start shifting towards that." And Electric changed their model. I think they're read only now, right? Um, Replicache was a big one. Replicache plus Reflect was their like hosted version. Um, they're rehashing into zero.dev. Uh, there was like another two or three of them too that all sort of we either had like new offerings or new things coming onto the scene, or like the ones that have been around for a while are going through this big rework. I think Auto Merge was I don't know if this was last year, but they've been working towards shifting from written in JavaScript to I think they're completely written on Rust now. So like probably add that to the con. It is very much an active a part of the ecosystem, like the overall web tech ecosystem that's an active development. So that's either a positive or a negative for you, and they call it the bleeding edge for a reason. Hopefully, hopefully didn't get cut too much there, Nor. Um, a lot going on. A lot going on. Okay, so I do really like that. It feels like they're thinking about history and state like this, because when you're making, it's one thing to do your own custom implementation because you know the trade-offs and where you would want to implement specific functionality versus not. When you're doing more of a generic thing, all those pieces generically need to have many potential features, um, which makes things a lot harder. And I think that's why we're seeing things sort of like go in waves or phases. Because implementing a generic version of this isn't nearly as straightforward. It's shifting the complexity. So rather than standing up loads of infrastructure to handle all of this, the intent is that you're doing more work on the client, but then that gives them more data, potentially more data ownership, and ability to like peer-to-peer sync or more directly collaborate. So it's and that's that trade-off that we're talking about. So you end up shifting your complexity from, do I want lots of DevOps potentially? Like it's not purely cut and dry. Like you're not going to completely eliminate all your infrastructure, but you could potentially make your infrastructure less complex or reduce the load there if all of your syncing, your edits are happening more like within a local network or something. But then you need a sync engine. And that's where the generic ones are nice, because writing your own sync engine or custom implementation isn't. You kind of need a team for that. So, I like that they're going peer to peer right away. Not all the libraries do peer to peer. There's like YJS does. I don't know that anybody else at least aggressively advertises that they're support peer to peer. The what's interesting to me about peer-to-peer is, yes, it's nice having clients talk to each other, but if you're thinking of things as a peer talking to a peer, you can still have a central store, but your central store is just another peer. At like an all 99 point whatever, always running additional peer. So it's interesting from the fact that like you don't have to have that there, and somebody doesn't have to use that central authority if they don't want to. So like data ownership, I really like that idea. And it's sort of this like fundamental piece. If you're not supporting peer-to-peer from the get-go, it seems like it's really hard to tack on later. At least based off of all the libraries that are out there, it seems like the ones that said we're peer-to-peer are the only ones that are like really well supporting it really well. And this looks very much like YJS or AutoMerge maybe. And I mean, honestly, a lot of them are pretty much like this. I think the ones where you start to see differences are like the electric SQL, where the intent isn't that they're handling every situation, or the ones that start working with encryption or the auth pieces of it, because then you start needing to thinking about like this doc is tied within this doc, and like this whole thing needs to be authed. So like the way that you group things changes a little bit. All right, so we've got, this is starting to get into some of the data structures, but we'll sort of, I guess we'll go over the homepage here. And here, this is where we're starting to see notes about the implementation leak. No, maybe leak is a bad word. Hint at the implementation, because the implementation of that CRDT sort of points to specific use cases. It looks like that's an actual like document. And as you can tell, if you can deal with a big white screen, it starts to get, you start to fall into this is very much a research thing, which is again active ecosystem. And yeah, I think this is probably the bit that's important about the data types matter, because if you're just doing a string, or you're just doing like a number or a single value, the algorithm that you need for the CRDT implementation is sort of like on a spectrum. And if you're doing these like deeper advanced data types, that implementation is not going to be the easiest. If you're again just syncing a bunch of records, you could nearly go off a timestamp. It's not exactly like timestamp isn't going to perfectly work, but it's closer to that. All right. Is there anything else in? So we got some tutorials. And then yeah, this is turning it into like tree and map. Version. Ooh, and export too. Like I think that like the fact that they're thinking about a bunch of these things. So I've been playing around with implementing some sort of state or CRDT type state into or adjacent to a library called StarFX. This StarFX is actually what we ended up pulling into this library. It is sort of a spiritual successor to Redux Saga. And you have a bunch of middlewares, you do actions, and then you can do follow-on work with those actions. So bringing it in provided a nice interface to abstract out the different bits, so that my view was very much like Redux dispatch. My view is a grab data, dispatch, and that's all. So now any work on updating the local state, or no, the state as in like the in-memory state, is in one spot. All of the actions that then run based off of those state changes and saved to the file system, this is all saved to the file system. That's in a separate piece. So like the architecture felt really nice and worked really well for it. And I actually have it in a couple places now. But the reason I bring that up is because it has the idea of persistence, where you can, and that's where this file system thing is hooked up. Anytime we make a change, we're saving that then out to the file system. That means when we open up or reload the app, we want to be able to pull that data back. There's no server attached to this. It is purely local. Dealing with the import and export is kind of annoying. In this case, we had sort of a custom like file format that we wanted, because I want to also use that same file content for other use cases. But just having some way to import and export and save it in a way that we could persist, like to the file system or something, is kind of nice. And actually they have a whole persistence section here. Cursor, ooh, and time travel. So like, I think what's really interesting to me is all the, it's clear they're thinking about all the things that I find interesting about CRDTs and local first. Yeah, ooh, yeah, one not to rely on CRDTs. Yeah, concurrent editing. User-defined invariants. That makes sense. Yeah. So, like, there's ways to handle it. It just shifts the complexity. You're not like eliminating complexity necessarily. It's just shifting it. And ideally, a nice library is going to shift into a place where you don't have to deal with it or see it as much. Doesn't mean you don't have to think about it. Yeah, here we talked about this. When merging edits from a peer that's been offline for a time, extensive changes may result. That doesn't meet expectations. So, like, yes, you either need to tolerate that in some way, or allow them to resolve manually. This is right on point. This is exactly what we talked about. Yeah, I think these are all the bits that are really making me interested in this library. Is all the pieces that we've been like talking about and thinking about. The docs are clearly saying that like we recognize this, and this is what we're doing to deal with it. And I like document version stuff too is, so this isn't just that the document changed, but also like the schema can potentially change over time. And like, how do you deal with that? I mean, yes, there's potentially ways, but like, I don't want to implement that. That just sounds awful. Like in reality, this is cool from like a tech implementation standpoint. Just in general, CRDTs I think are cool, but there's interest in like working on the thing. Like I would be interested in spending time working on code that's handling CRDTs. But if I'm writing an app, I don't want to care. I want to be able to do the features that are going to make my app stand out. The reason I would pull in a library would be because of the feature set is going to give me superpowers. The less I have to like think about these, like here, if I would have to implement something like that myself, not fun. So the more that they're thinking about this and not pushing it down on the user, the nicer experience it can be. But it also means that maintenance and the library, expanding so quickly that it implodes is potentially something, that needs to sit in the back of your mind. If the library is too big, it becomes hard to maintain, and then that's when maintenance kind of disappears. So there's a balance. I think this is probably the last bit. We'll go through the getting started, and then we'll look at some of these other. I guess we'll look at the performance claims just because I see them right down here. They're a whole section. But let's zoom through the getting started real quick because I just want to see like how some of these pieces fit together. There's Loro, which is a Rust grade, and then Loro CRDT. Actually, I'm curious what. Okay, so you can do the whole CRDT in Rust. And the reason I find that interesting is because we do a lot of Tori work on stream. Tori, the backend or the OS level code is, I guess you could say, is written and handled in Rust. If you have multiple web views, handling some of the state directly in Rust can be potentially helpful because then that state can all be handled and synced in one spot. And then each window, each web view is just more of a view rendering piece. So where you put the logic can matter a little bit depending on your use case. And having this as an option is kind of neat. But it doesn't seem like there's anything more than like it works in Rust. Python and Swift, I don't think there's anything we need to specifically look at there. We need to, so the fact that it's written in Rust means we need to figure out WASM. That would work in browsers because the browsers support WASM. And it also works in Tori, sort of the same situation. There is a little bit of configuration you need to do because, like in this case, we're using, this is an example for Vite. This is Webpack. You need to make sure that the bundler is aware that this is a WASM thing and it needs to deal with it because it's not going to just generically crawl and look for WASM files like it does JavaScript. And I think for our example app, we'll probably just spin up a VDAP, so we'll probably need to come back to that. These are like the other examples. Here's some notes on data types. We'll get into the containers, saving and loading and syncing. And here's events. I think events are interesting too because I kind of like mentally qualify apps in sort of like two high level buckets. You're either a fancy GUI on top of a database. Not saying that's a bad thing. Like that inherently there's some apps that are just going to be a fancy layer over a database. But there's also a second set of apps that they have data, but they do a lot of work to derive data off of that. So like the user inputs a single record, but then you derive a bunch of data off of that. So being able to memoize that derived data is nice. So the fact that we can kind of keep an eye on when we are making edits versus when edits are coming in and potentially use that in the memoization considerations, that seems nice. Okay. I think that kind of covers everything we want to look through in the docs. Let's go look through the benchmarks. And I may need a water break in a bit. All right. So, I mean, there's probably a lot of salt to be considered here. Specific system requirements. I mean, they are doing the same comparison of everything. They're also, I mean, it seems like it's really well documented, and they have a repo for it, so we could theoretically grab these and run these. The problem I've seen with this though is folks that are, say, well versed with Loro are going to write performant Loro code. That doesn't mean that they necessarily are familiar with YJS or AutoMerge to the point where their code they write for that is going to be just as performant. So like the code you actually write to handle the situation could potentially have an effect. So not saying that's the case here, but anytime you have this situation, it's something to keep in mind. All right, so some version numbers, bundle sizes. It is a little bit bigger, which, I mean, they're using the beta. I don't know. I mean, it's like twice as big. YGS is on the smaller side, but honestly, that's still pretty big. 84 kilobytes. I'm assuming that's not gzipped. Oh yeah, okay. Keep reading. Gzipped. So, I mean, in general, they're doing a lot of work, so they're not going to be the smallest. They're all. I mean, it's hard to compare these because, like, yes, number bigger, but also like, does that matter? Like 1 millisecond versus 5 versus 6. Append end characters. How often are you doing that? That this is going to be a big enough difference. What is interesting here is the oh yeah, that bridge over the WASM really seems to have a little bit of an effect here because all the WASM. Well, okay, never mind. This one's the fastest. And this comes back to like right tool for the right job. Depending on what you're doing, like these numbers may actually make a difference. So Loro is in this column right here. Honestly, they're all in the same. There is cases where it's winning or getting close to winning. And like this can matter, update size, because anytime you make a change, that needs to then be sent across the wire for others to update. The more data you're sending across the wire, the longer it potentially can take, especially if you're doing lots of little updates. So think like a video game. They need to render a whole frame every certain, a good feeling game is probably what 200 frames a second. Every frame you need to have everything, all the data there to be able to render the frame. So the like client communication, me to server to other player, that matters. And if you're sending a lot of data, it's going to take more time to travel. And if you need those updates really fast, what might seem like a little bit of data or small numbers might actually start to add up quite a bit. So like you're probably not making a game with these kind of libraries, which is fine. That's not their intent. But right tool for the right job, as we've said multiple times already. Um, it seems to be kind of like all over the board. I'm honestly like, it said it was performant. I mean, some of these can currently insert string of length and it wins, but like, okay, auto merge, but it's not beating YJS. So, and these are such small numbers, sample size and um, rounding start to actually have an effect. If you're just straight up saying, is this number bigger than the other? So like this task does well. I concurrently insert n words at random positions. So, I mean, we're kind of all over the board, honestly. They got a lot of data here, though. It's pretty interesting. Let's check out the native benchmarks. This is purely the Rust implementation. So not what we'd actually see in the browser, but interesting to kind of see. And this is where the numbers are different. The Rust implementation seems to be quite. They don't win this one. Wow. It's interesting because like you can see where the optimization, the time to optimize has been put in, and I imagine many of these things are still in process. So like, this is a big number. I'm assuming they're working on it. This was last updated a few months ago, so some of these numbers could have changed, but they do some work, and there's cases, especially the like encode decode. So it seems like at least with Rust and do they have an encode decode here? Encode time. Honestly, once you throw WASM into the mix there, why doesn't it search down? Weird. Once you throw WASM into the mix, it really muddies the numbers up a little bit. They seem to be doing well with document load and so like decode encode would be opening up the web page basically. Well, I guess in this case in the native, it's not opening up the web page, but like startup time, grabbing the data and then handling it. I don't know if the encode decode actually matters too much once it's loaded, the updates in between. But they seem to be doing well in the native section. WASM definitely muddies it up. And then document size. I think document size is kind of interesting because how you save the data can also matter. So depending on what you're doing, you potentially, if you have lots of little updates, you potentially want to start squashing some updates at some point. So this would be if we use the same thought process of Git, when you have a long running branch, at some point in checking out that main branch is just awful because there's so much history there that you need to download, and you're downloading every little change in that. And if you have lots of branches that are sitting around too, that starts to make like that whole clone can potentially be a lot of work. So what some CRDT libraries have done is at some point you could keep track of the number of clients or have some time-based way to determine when history past a certain point doesn't matter. So there's the value of having history is high when it's near term. I want to be able to undo my last 10 actions. It's also high. there's high value when you have the offline sync sort of situation. I go on a train ride on the weekend, do a bunch of work. Say I was doing a train ride on Friday night, and I did a whole bunch of work, um, but I'm doing it on a document that can only sync on my work network. I'm completely offline. I get online. I could be online through the weekend, but I'm not actually going to sync until Monday. So you have to think about that. Like, how long do you want people to be able to sync once they go offline? If you extend that out to a month, now you need to have basically like a month worth potentially of history, because you need to then take that person's changes and lace them into the existing state over the past month. But also, like, if they've been offline for a month, do you really want to do that? Do you trust their data to then be applied? So what you could then do is, if we have some logic to have apply a cutoff, anything say past 30 days, we could basically just say we're squashing it. We only care about what the state was at that period 30 days ago, and like that's the beginning of our time travel point. The reason you do that would be document size. So if we need to sync a new client, or the way the CRDT algorithm works is that it needs to traverse over that whole history. If that history is really huge, that starts to have effect on performance. So garbage collection, compressing, truncation, all are different ways you can go about keeping performance high by doing work on the data that doesn't really matter anymore. So they use the auto-merge paper data set. So what this is doing is it's doing snapshots, and we'll end up looking at the API for that in a minute here. Yeah, here. It allows shallow snapshot encoding. Say that 5 times fast, with GC capabilities by truncating the history. So like this would be something good for, if truncated from the latest version, the result would be this. So if you're like persisting state, that could potentially be useful. When I start up the app, I could work off of that snapshot, load all the data and work off of that, and then in the background sync things up. Like that's potentially an option. But all of that only matters or is worth doing if you start actually hitting issues with the size of the document. So depending on how they're storing it, starts to have if they're saving all of history, then it starts to be something you need to think about. It seems rather comparative though. I don't see, like, these numbers don't feel too different. I think probably the biggest thing is that shallow. So it has that, like, it matches for the most part, and then it has a couple extra features on top in case you need them, which is kind of neat. All right. I guess with that said, we've started getting into the performance comparison. Oh, that's interesting. Why is that? What did I do to my implementation here? Well, this is boop, because I don't want to have to think about these again, because I have a feeling I borked it again. Yes, jeez. If a Jacob Boulder thumbnail tells me I'm going to want to see something, clicking in. Nice. So that's what I need. I just need to say, click this thing. Yeah, I'll specifically put your name on it. Hey, you. Well, like, what if that was actually a feature in YouTube that you could put the username in the actual thumbnail, like just dynamically embedded in there. That would be kind of hilarious. First person to figure that out is going to get all the views. Okay. Now, yeah, we definitely, I need to just stop dragging because it's clearly borking things. Check out the performance claims. Okay, what did I do? I got a real bad state going on here. So we checked out the docs. Check out the performance claims. Feature comparison. CRDT data types. I'm definitely getting a lot more succinct in my to-dos. Quick example app. Okay, so we did this and we did that. And I cared about the timestamp for some reason, and then apparently my drag and drop doesn't quite work yet. There's always stuff to do. Always stuff to do. If you're curious about this code, by the way, the app is actually right here. It is currently running in the background. There you go. Okay, so let's look at this feature compare. Why aren't you scrolling up? Okay. I think I remember seeing a feature comparison somewhere. There was some notes on the GitHub. I don't know that it's a true feature comparison. So they have peer-to-peer, local availability. Are these all the same? So not quite. Yeah. Oh, that seems interesting. That seems interesting. Optimized for memory, CPU, and loading speed. So I'm not sure what scalability and local availability means. Or, I mean, Delta updates, sure. Okay. Text editing with Fugue? Not sure how you say that. I feel like that, how you pronounce it, is sort of dependent, like language dependent. So it's, you got to know which language you're saying it from. Movable tree, movable list. Those are interesting. Last right wins map. Okay. So like if you've done CRDTs before, these pieces probably make more sense. But we'll get into them a little bit, and we'll look at the data types real quick, and then I want to spin up an example app. What time we got? I have a little bit of a hard stop, so probably go for maybe another hour. Fast document loading. So that's that encode decode that we looked at on the performance graph. Time travel. So the time travel, I think, is going to be interesting, mostly in the case of what Nora was saying before, where we my screen's not big enough to see it, but one of these messages somewhere. If you have lots of updates, especially old updates that get synced through, the way the logic handles it might not be what the user is expecting. So being able to time travel through history and have the ability to recall or go back to or manually change the way it did the sync, I think is potentially pretty powerful. And yeah, I'm not sure what they mean by this, and we've seen a few mentions of version control. I want to look into that somewhere. Where we'll actually version control. Shallow snapshot, that works. Like get a shallow cone. Yep, okay, that makes sense. That's what we just looked at. and some examples. Um, yeah, I mean, you could definitely see a similar algorithm, and like the API feels very similar too. Martin Klebman is with Ink and Switch right now, I think. Right? No. Oh no. Has just worked in concert with him a few times. They're at Cambridge. Um. Oh, hey, look at that. Oh, one of the people behind Automerge. Okay, so they're not with Ink and Switch, but they're behind Automerge, which makes sense. So I was merging them together in my head, I guess would be the way to say that. I feel like I recognize their name, but I don't recall where. And you can see we very quickly get into folks that are like career academics or folks that are deep in academics. And like there's still a lot of research kind of going on in this space because the um, computation and space are still pretty sensitive. So like you can get all these neat features and you can potentially do some of that work in the background. But like if you're not thinking about like the length of your history, for example, if the document gets really huge, those calculations start to, that you lose the nice feel of local first and it being very responsive, which is not what you want. So, all right, I don't really see a comparison, which is fine. I mean, I think the thing that I was thinking about as far as comparison goes is mostly like the credits and the feature list. Okay, so we'll cross that one off. Let's look at all the different CRDT types. Um, so we've got the top level Loro doc. That's very similar to a couple of other options that we've tried. Um, Interesting. Set a specific peer ID. Okay. Then they have these things called containers, which is effectively like subdocs, I think is what they've been called in other systems. And they are like functionally attached to this root doc instance, is my understanding. And we have a list and text, and then we also have a movable list, which I think is potentially important. So we'll want to keep that in mind here. So text, I mean, these two probably pretty common to see. Key value pairs. I would say looking at other options, many of these are like there's going to be overlap. You'll see text and lists show up in other cases, like the YJS has the arrays and the text. I think is the two big ones. Or list and map and then text. So like text is the YJS presence aware thing like demo that you always see. List and map are ones that we've used on stream. But then this one also has tree and movable list. So we're not inherently losing any specific APIs from what I can tell if we were switching off something like YJS. We can insert text. Config text style. That's kind of neat. Rich text support. I don't know if YJS or others have that offhand, but need to see. Maps. Maps and lists. These look like a map and a set, right? Set. So like the JavaScript, like low level APIs, built like the built-in APIs. This is, map and list seem to have at least similar APIs to those. A tree container. So we get a node. So like legitimately just a string of data. So we create a node and then we can branch off of it. I don't know a specific use case for this, honestly. I mean, like, I guess if you're doing like mind maps or something like that, or drawing, then something like this could start to come into play. Because think, if you have a tree, so we're like doing a mind map or a group of, like a diagram or something, and it is you have a node and then it has arrows off to other nodes, and then each of those have arrows off. What if somebody says, well, I want this piece over here, and you drag that whole thing? That seems like a heck of a lot of work to deal with in one of the other data types. So if you have this specific use case, this feels like it could be really nice. But it feels like you'd have to have that specific use case, or at least something like that. Now this one is interesting because movable list is like this actually maps pretty closely to what we have here. Movable list is a list of tasks that are in a specific order, and like, so this app, the to-do app, is using the library called StarFX, which builds on top of Image.js. It's just a generic data store, so when I'm grabbing the data, I need to specifically order it. Otherwise, it's kind of just giving me in whatever, like it doesn't necessarily keep the insert order. And you can't really like give it a sort order and have it maintain that sort order, other than like memoizing the return. There's the use selector. So if you've done anything with Redux, or Redux Saga, use selector will memoize a return of data. You can write the code to sort it there and say, well, when I get this data, I wanted to have it sorted in this specific order, and then memoize it. That, so like, if you have that use case, which I think this is probably a much more common use case, honestly, where I want to be able to like move tasks around within the list, and what's like the code and logic to handle that can get complex. So like this is something you could potentially do in, like the list container. But like getting the sync right and all the logic on when that changes. So if you have a to-do list and you want to order it, like prioritize it, and you have multiple people working on that same set of, like that same to-do list, yeah, that would be really nice. Collaboration features. So, yep. I mean, I say yep and kind of just go right over this, but like, it's cool. This also looks like everything else, though. So I don't mean to belittle it, but functionally, it seems to be the same setup as other ones. Undo redo. You have to give in an undo manager here, and then there's undo steps, which is kind of nice too. Where do you insert? Okay, doc. Okay. So you like pass it into the class, so then I can act on those. Okay. So then I can like change the state over time. You can save and load document states from snapshots. Yeah. So like this is kind of what I was talking about before. We can create a snapshot, and then that snapshot could be persisted so that when you open up the app, you can actually load from the snapshot rather than trying to like reach out to your peers to get the data, which is, the fact that it's kind of just baked in is really nice, because the handling the data and saving it out and then bringing it back is like it isn't hard, but the fact they did it for me is really nice. I've done it in a couple places now, and um, I mean we've made it work, but like I would love to just call a function. Um, yeah, shallow import export. So, I don't know. I'm kind of curious what the use case for it would be. Obviously, shallow means data is not as big. But like, what do you lose? Not well. Okay, so they say the pros here: sharing the document with others without revealing the complete history. That makes sense, actually. So like, if you want to do, you want to add somebody as a, yeah, okay, I could see that making sense. So I work on a document. I share it with somebody. I could potentially say, well, I only want them to see the current state and the state moving forward. That shallow export, I guess, as a state mechanism would be really good for that. All right. So is there? I mean, we can look at some of these a little bit more directly, but I think I kind of would mind just like playing around with them a little bit. Oh, we do want to look at versions. It's not inherently part of the like data type group. But I think it kind of comes into play. So it's like schema related. So it says you can use linear version numbers to represent a version, such as incrementing a number or using timestamps. Yeah, their version representation is different. So it's not clear to me that, like, we've got a couple different versions here, right? Is this the, like, what's the use case of using this version or like this function? Is this a version for, like the schema? If I want to mutate the schema or change the schema over time, is that when you'd use this version? I imagine there's use cases internally, but like as an external API, what would be the use case that'll use this function? And I don't think that's quite clear. Do we have anything else with, okay, so there's version vectors. How many operations starting from 0 need to be included for each peer? Okay. And again, this starts to get into the more researchy academic implementation of it. But I mean, like if you're really using this, it's important to understand these bits because it's going to affect how your data is merged together. And like invariably, you're going to get questions from users like, why did this thing sync or do the thing that it did? And understanding this enough that you can answer that question, I think is potentially valuable. So this is, I mean, you squint and this is like get history, right? Okay, convert between version vectors and frontiers in Loro. So like you can include it in there, I guess, in the history. Oh, interesting. So I don't know what they deep dive on it, but I still don't see like we can import and export from like specific versions. It's not terribly obvious like when or why you'd use some of those. Internally, they look like they matter. Externally, I don't see the use cases strongly. Undo. Oh, they have a demonstration for undo redo. Oh, that's kind of cool. So the undo redo even syncs across. All right, um, I think we can cross the version control off. We did also want to. I just remembered this. We wanted to look at ecosystem. What's the ecosystem look like? We did. We'll cross off CRDT data types as well, and let's do the. Let's look at the ecosystem real quick, and then we'll spin up a quick example app. There is Loro, the org, and it has a whole bunch of repositories. Like we might be able to actually look back through and maybe they have a page for this, but let's just look through their actual list of repositories real quick. You'll see a few of the crates it looks like that they're using for implementing pieces of this. So I'm imagining that if we look at Loro, which is the Rust implementation, and it looks like this also handles like I'm seeing a PNMP in here. So there's clearly some JavaScript in here. But if you look at the crates, there's a lot of crates actually. Loro Common, Loro Wasm. So like, what does this look like? We have a couple crates and then like generic B tree. So it looks like generic B tree. A couple of these are actually written with intent to then use it in Loro. They have pinned at least the Prosmere and Excalibur bindings. So if you're using CodeMirror or Prosmere, it looks like they have bindings for it. The Swift bindings in Python, which we saw before. Is there anything else in here? Yeah, the Excalibur. I don't know what the Excalibur is for. Somebody's like right outside my door. They're putting stuff down for the bugs by our house. But they're talking on their phone. I was checking to see if you could hear it on the coming through on the mic. Okay, so all right, Excalibur. Maybe a demo? I don't think Excalibur uses Loro. I want to say that they're on YJS, but I'm not certain offhand. So this might just be a demo, like saying that it is a replacement or a drop-in replacement or something like that. I guess that's the main one. This was the other one I wanted to look at. A peer-to-peer collaborative text editing demo that uses IRO, I think is how you say it. So this is by, where are they on here? So this is a group that is, I don't recognize any of these caretaker. Nice. I feel like there's somebody that I know that is involved with this, but I don't see them listed, so I'm gonna kind of just leave it at that. But this seems like a new thing, new-ish that is specifically around like peer-to-peer. So that, I mean, it's cool that they're experimenting with that. I don't know that would be useful for anybody outside of like, it's a neat demo. So I think we can leave it at that, and we'll do. Oh, let's look at their docs and then see if we can find any notes with that. What does local first state mean? Here we're gonna, because this is. Well, here we'll get to that question in a second. Actually, let's just double check that there's no other notes about like ecosystem stuff. So these are the examples we found. Here's the time travel. And then you got this, like, and each can time travel at different. Like you're not time traveling everybody. Like that's just cool. It's one of those things that is useful potentially for folks that are using your app, but also like demos really well. Like just the fact that you have this kind of means, at least for me, like they're thinking about the things that I care about if they are showing demos like this on their homepage for any random app that you would get. All right, I don't see actually any comparisons or anything, which is fine. I'm not saying that it's a requirement, to be clear. But inherently you end up choosing one versus the other for a project, and you need to do some level of like, what are the benefits in this one relative to this one? It seems like there's a lot of overlap though. So I'm gonna cross this one off, and we'll get into it a little bit more as we're digging through. Man, that timestamp bothers me. I thought I had fixed it. I thought I had fixed the drag and drop. I don't know. Programming. Gotta love it. Yeah. So, what does local first state mean? That seems like a simple question, but there's potentially a short to very long answer. So I think the first thing that I always end up pointing to is Ink and Switch is a company that does a lot of like R&D type work, or like deep level thinking type work. And they have a few like high level pieces that they've been exploring for quite some time. But they put out this article, which is like a I don't know if manifesto is the right word, but here we were just looking at Martin Kleppman. This is sort of like in concert with AutoMerge. And they have these like high level tenets of what is or should be the goal of like a local first app. This is probably the best. So when you're thinking about state, there's many places you can save the state, and where you save it and how you save it and how you allow the user to interact with it and control it. That sort of is part of that qualification of what a local first app is. Not all local first apps are created equal. Not all infrastructure or SaaS or PASS. Is that pass? I've never actually said like the acronym. Platform as a service. They're not all created equal. So a lot of it is like understanding what the value is that thing is bringing, because these 7 tenants are potentially valuable, all valuable for your user. I don't think there's anything that you can grab off the shelf that's actually going to allow you to hit every one of these tenets. So like at some point you're going to potentially, like you might not be able to do collaboration, or ensuring that your data is like forever accessible in a way that somebody could use it might not be possible. So when we say local first state, the common ones are probably the fact that you have it local and your expectation is that operations happen locally first and then are synced in the background, tends to lead to apps that feel very fast because you're not waiting for the operations over the wire. If you click on one of the questions or tasks, you have a clip of yourself answering the question. Yeah, that's what the to-do app is eventually going into. I don't know if it'll be like that clippy, but the intent of this app is that I'm going to get timestamps. Every time I check the thing, I have a time here. Oh, no. Please don't drag weird. Okay. There's a bug in my dragging. My drag and drop has some bug that I apparently missed. It blitzes all my content. So yeah, fast. Offline is probably one of the bigger ones. Collaboration, yeah, maybe. Collaboration usually requires some sort of like central authority or online thing that everybody connects through, which means that if you have collaboration, you don't always have good offline. They, in the past, have been more mutually exclusive than other bits on here. So fast, and user control and offline are probably going to be the ones that tend to fit in the bucket of like local first state. So my state is just something that the user has. Well, and then I guess a little bit of privacy in there too. Local first means that all operations happen locally and then are potentially synced. But like the central authority isn't, you're not as dependent on that. Some of that can come with ability to then more directly work offline, but then have more control over and better privacy over that data of yours. So it would be like Signal. Is Signal a local first app? No, not really. But it's privacy focused. Everything's end-to-end encrypted. Those messages go from my computer to somebody else's computer. It technically goes through, I'm pretty sure it goes through a central authority. But like they can't see it. It's end-to-end encrypted. So yes, you have some like privacy is big there. User control kind of. But then like fast and offline, no, not really. So it's very much like a spectrum. When somebody though says local first state or local first app, usually some or many of these like high level boxes are checked. Because if you get at least a couple of these, it starts to like really inform and direct your architecture, because you can't push towards the single central authority controlling everything architecture and be able to meet many of these. So that would be the qualification. You're probably, if you're checking off a bunch of these, then you might have something that could be qualified as local first app or for local first state. All right, so I guess we do example app, right? Let's go ahead and pull that up. We have a repo called local first because we've done a few things with local first. I don't know. We actually did one with Tinybase. I tried to import it into here, but it became involved, so I haven't gotten it completely pulled in here. I wanted to like pull it in with the actual like version history and stuff. Speaking of merging stuff, and yeah, it's git commands. But we've done auto merge, we've done YJS, we've done a few on YJS, and I guess maybe a few on auto merge too. And then we did Tiny Base. Tiny Base is a little bit more of a like meta framework. It's a thing that also helps you with like your the React handles and React state part of it, and then it has providers or things that then bind to these lower level pieces like YJS. So we've done those 3 pieces, and we're going to make a Loro. Actually, I'm going to remove that just because I think we're going to just spin up a create React app. Did I had that open already, didn't I? Excuse me, I said create React. Old habits, I guess. Whoop, not Vita. We're going to do create Vite. Vite has slowly been taking over my it's got that brain seed there. So now whenever I'm spinning up something quick, I tend to use Vite as my default. They've done a good job with the ecosystem. Okay. We want to call it Loro, and I'm gonna do React just because I'm from, well, I guess. So the problem with some of these state management libraries is that, interesting, React Router. I guess we don't really need React Router in there. I guess let's open it, and then we'll do in that. Come on, npmi. And what we're gonna end up just throwing in a bunch of things in there to test, I think. Now, what was I saying? Loro TypeScript. Oh, so here I'll drop this in the chat. So I think it's gonna have all the React bits in here, everything that we need. And I don't really feel like I need a template. I think we're gonna just go through the getting started. Here we need to, let's close some things. Okay. I think we'll just go through this. So the downside of some of these libraries is that, I mean, I guess downside is sort of relative, but when you're implementing this is very much like we've got it in a init. It's just in a script here. There's no like hooks or, like view angular binding implementation kind of stuff. So you have to, it's generic, which is nice, but then it's generic, which is kind of annoying at the same time. To be clear, I'm not a fan of like everything implementing bindings for every single framework, because that is a lot, but it does mean that we need to do a little bit of effort to get the mental model and like map it into something that we can actually render. So if we do an npm run dev, we should get our, now I need to double check. Okay, so this is on 5173. I'm not gonna like completely screw up this app because I think they're both on Vite actually. So if we open up local host 5174, okay, we have an app. So we do need to do this. I think we'll pull this in and we'll get the bits installed. This isn't something we can just straight up copy and paste because it's got top level await. Yep. Oh. Interesting. Interesting. I don't know that, like, do I need to install these? It's not, I'm guessing they don't just like come along for the ride. So like it doesn't specifically say I need to install these, but I'm assuming that I need to actually install these. So we're gonna add in a Loro CRDT. And you can see they're doing some work, even though they just released V1 a few weeks ago, month ago, something like that. They got some more options in here already. And then our dev dependencies, we're going to add in the Vite plugin wasm. I don't know why it pins it, but and then the Vite plugin. I don't think we actually need this. I think we can just tweak the configuration, but top level await. And honestly, I don't know if these are going to. There we go. Oh. I don't know if these are going to support Vite 6. So we might end up having to play around with that a little bit. Because it doesn't specifically say, like this snippet isn't specifically saying a version of Vite. All right, so if we do a refresh, stuff isn't breaking. So that's something. And we got, I don't know if we need to do this in net. Because I don't see it anywhere else, which is kind of interesting, but so we're gonna just try this. And if we do a little copy and paste in here. So what this is doing is it's rendering a bunch of stuff. I don't really care about the logos. Let's get rid of the logos. And I'm going to also get rid of the assets because no reason to push those up. There's also Vite. Where's that? Vite.svg. Why don't I see it? So this one's in assets, which I just deleted. Oh, it's in the public. Okay. All right. Sure. Let's delete it. Let's see what happens. Might as well just break all the things right away, right? So if we do a new doc, this is the, we need to map this, like figure out the mental map here. When this opens up and mounts, app can potentially re-render. We don't want to generate a new doc every time it re-renders. So like the getting started is nice, but also like we can't really copy and paste it. And then like these are just, it's firing off an operation and then it's just done. So the like interaction with the browser is low. So I'm going to assume that if we do something like this, this is going to give us a piece that exists outside of whenever app mounted. And here is basically like syncing them together. Doc A and Doc B are two documents in different devices. So if we do So it doesn't actually update until we call the import with this example, which is, I mean, I get what they're doing, but also like not something worth copying and pasting. Okay, so we can check out the doc on a given version. And like this is potentially useful for where like, again, we don't want all the, sorry, I'm cracking my knuckles, I guess, right into the mic. We need to think about how long or how big this document gets. Just because we are saving, or we could save the whole document, doesn't necessarily mean that every device needs to do that, from what I can tell. Because like you can do the shallow copy and send that shallow copy to somebody. So we could have a central authority that's optional that has the full history, which is kind of a really neat idea, because then your devices could just get like the history that they care about. So this would be like in the vein of, if I want to pay for a sync service, the sync service is going to give me the ability to sync, but then like version history for the past year. And then your device only holds, the last 2 weeks or something, say. And then we can get the JSON representation of it. So I guess that's something we can do real quick here. Well, I mean, I don't really care about that. I don't really care about any of this, but if we do a pre, we can say JSON.stringify. Yes, because we want to then call doc a.toJSON. And we are going to have a null replacer into. We'll just hide this button for right now because we got rid of the state. So nothing, basically empty, which is fine because we need to then do something like this. And I think actually, I understand the peer-to-peer is a thing and something we could demo. But we can do this. So then we can actually see something in there. We'll do import, and that is a type. So now we have an updated state. So if we do button on click, we want to say list.insert. I guess I don't really care where it's inserted, right? And I guess this kind of comes back to the APIs. So we have a list. There's a map. This deletes some stuff and checks. So if we say something like the list and movable list, so we can push. Yeah. So I don't want to insert. I just want to push. Just push something in there. And we'll just say, I mean, it's strings right now. So like, how do we make it somewhat random? Yeah, we'll just hard code it for right now. And then we'll say the add a. Whoop. Hotkeys. Whoops. Also, that's what I changed. Look at what I changed. Okay, so now every time we add an a, it's technically mutating the state, but our state is not actually updating because like React doesn't know to update the state. So again, this comes back around to we can do this and like we can copy and paste this and this is imperative, as in like it does all these operations in order. But then we need to take that mental model and put it into our actual view. So if we change this list, we need this to update anytime list changes. So how do we trigger that? Which is it, like it's basically this is a state. And a state that's changing over time. So if we do, it might just make sense to pass this in. So if we say doc, and this is going to be a main, I don't know if this will work. We shall find out. If we pass this in as a prop, I don't know how it's going to see those mutations. Are those mutations going to change or not? So this is a Loro doc like this, and I don't know how much this matters, but we'll go ahead and just type it right away. And so you can see it's not actually like updating, but when we hot reload, that like forces an update. So you can see it has actually updated. But also like hot reload means that we're inserting all these every time as well. So if we do this and reload, empty list, add, still an empty list because we don't have anything like persisting that state. And this doesn't see it as an update. So like the prop isn't actually changing. So that's, again, like choosing one of these libraries ends up being kind of a deep architecture choice. It's not something you're going to attack on. And that's why like looking at something like Electric SQL, part of the intent of using something like that is that you can put it on brownfield project. It kind of mentally maps to like a GraphQL service in my head. You're putting it in front of something, it's operating and just making your experience for dev or DX or potentially UX, UI, UX better. But you're not swapping out everything else to make that happen. You can kind of sprinkle it in as needed and then expand on it from there, which is nice. Not so much when you end up using a library like this. So how do we let React know that something has changed? There's the React sync external store, React sync external store. I wonder if something like that is going to be that provides a subscription to read a value from the external data store. So these bits are subscribing to it. Yeah. But like the annoying thing is you do all this work and now you have to like pass. So you're sort of like shifting where your state is handled. So maybe your state was in a use state hook before. Now you're shifting where your state is handled, and then you end up kind of having to write hooks again to grab that state. So yeah. So like here, to-do store, use give it a function to subscribe to it, and then this is how it gets a snapshot of the actual data. So it's in some ways memoizing it. So if that's the case, how do we this is going to come back to the events. We had saw the event handling before. Yep. So as changes happen in the document, how do we subscribe to them? Okay, so there's a doc.subscribe. So we can potentially do something like that. We're currently just showing the JSON. So if we say something like, I'm thinking we keep these bits as like the thing has mutated, and if we do something like const, let's grab one of their here snapshot, I guess. Sure. Snapshot. Use sync external store, doc.subscribe, and then doc.get. What do we got? Get path map. This is probably where we're gonna like look at the snapshot. Get container counter list map. Get shallow value. Interesting. So what so when we call a doc.commit, oh. Do we need to actually like commit every time we make a change? Triggering a commit. Okay. Oh, here we actually talked about this a little bit. The persistence. Import the entire snapshot, export a complete snapshot, and implementing debounce to trigger saves. So like this is neat because like I see places where I could potentially wire this up into existing things that I use. And then you can transmit it over any medium, WebRTC, WebSocket, or HTTP, which is cool. So if we do, I don't want to do a shallow snapshot, like literally any time anything changes. And if we have to listen to the commit, that's sort of annoying too. And actually, I guess we didn't really look at the container. So we have a counter. Where's the container? Event subscriptions. So when we call subscribe, we'll get events as they come in. And you could subscribe to specific pieces too. So we could do, this is a doc, and we can say doc.list, and we can say list.subscribe, and then usesync external store has a list.subscribe and then a snapshot. So if we I guess all of these are containers. Okay. List.insert container. Okay. So we have a text container and we can nest stuff. Got it. And I've seen that in some of the other ones too. You can do like subdocs, I think is what other setups call it. And then if we do that, I just want to like this needs a snapshot, but also let's look at the React docs. Subscribe, get snapshot, get server snapshot. The get snapshot was going to return the actual snapshot, right? I don't care about that value. What if we literally just do this? Let's see what we're working with. Get snapshot, boop, and then snapshot is not used, and that's why it's throwing an error. So, there. What is that going to look like? Something that doesn't work. Whoop. Let's put this on the bottom. Okay. Cannot read properties of undefined. So it doesn't like the list dot subscribe is what it looks like. If we go to the event handling, so we can subscribe to a doc. We can see when versions are checked out. So like version checkout, I still don't quite get the use case behind one versus the other. So maybe if you're checking out, like if you're doing like time travel debugging and you want to go to an, like check out a specific commit on a branch. If we're thinking like GitHub get terms, I guess if you're checking out specific docs, maybe the type of version that represents that is useful in one form or another. But I don't know. I'm not quite clear what the version, why the version stuff matters. So container IDs, so we can have all these like nested pieces. And I guess if we just do like a shallow snapshot. So if we do something like this, so list.subscribe, and it doesn't like that? No, it doesn't. If we go and look at a Loro doc, and we look at the subscription, so we subscribe, it gets an event and does a thing. And use sync external store. Does things. So how is it firing those off? Subscribe, get snapshot. Okay. Here. Okay. React will subscribe to your store if you pass a different subscribe function between re-renders. I don't think that is part of our issue, but the result of get snapshot should be cached to avoid an infinite loop. Sure. I mean, I guess at the moment we could just do this. It will eventually be something like this. Well, not that, but like, can I read properties of undefined? That's not helpful at all. Use sync external store list up subscribe. So if we just take this out, it's definitely that, right? Const subscribe equals hi Alan. Nope, not subscribe. the subtle click the subscribe button, is that what that was? I was just like unintentionally thinking that in my head. Not saying that you aren't, or any implication otherwise, but like, hi on. Yeah, so it's definitely this. You don't want to be in this code, I'm sorry. Use sync external store as it takes a subscribe and a get snapshot. So why doesn't the subscribe that we give at work subscribing, most of your components will only read data. Yep, that is the case. Should subscribe to the store and return a function that unsubscribes. Does it return a function that unsubscribes? That's probably the bit that I didn't actually see anything about unsubscribing. So like if we have this and then this is going to return you give it a listener and it returns a subscription. Where's the button? There we go. What's subscription look like? Void. So how do you unsubscribe to it? We might not even be able to use this directly because if the subscribe doesn't give us a way to unsubscribe, it's going to be kind of annoying to implement it here. I mean, this is probably defer updating part of the UI, use callback, use action state. Okay, that's not it. Before any layout effects fire, okay. They've definitely added APIs to we're on React 19, right? No, we're not. Does that matter? I don't think so, but like 18. Reference. Hooks. Sync state or use sync external store looks the same. All right. Let us we can go into examples and see what they're doing for some of these. So this is using Quill. That's it. Docs, crates, GitHub. All right. We saw some examples before, right? Where are they? This was just where we were, right? Yep. Was it in the docs? Stories, public, pages. Oh, do they have a... Oop. Timeline stories. Okay. Loro examples, Dino. So all these are tests. There's also an examples down here. Where do these link? So we got an Excalibur, and then we've got this time travel. This is using React. Okay. So this is using React Flow. Where did I see it? React Flow example. So this is using React. React Flow is a library that does it's like SVG type things. It is using 18. So we have some similar overlap here. Root. It's using Radix UI and app. So if we look at app, it is doing a whole bunch of work to set things up. Types, set more bits up. So this is like all hard coded effectively. Well, some of these are functions to like helper functions. I'm going to just hide all of these. So it's not doing anything dynamic. It's not doing anything dynamic because all we need for this example is to show the time travel piece of it. So it's do a bunch of imperative code, set up some like initial state. And it's just more convenient to actually write it out as hard coded pieces instead. And then, so like this is all set up. And then there's some helper functions. So our actual app here is, got it. We've got a big memo. And then that gives us doc A and doc B, of which we pass into oh, interesting. Oh, because this is a toggle. So depending on if you want to see them connected, then you can toggle that on and off. So we pass flow the actual doc itself. And in this case, we're setting up this makes sense. We're setting up the doc in the use memo. So this ends up giving, this big use memo is only going to run once, which should functionally work the same as what we have up. Because we are initializing our doc before we mount. The mount should only happen once. It might get weird in dev, so this might be worthwhile to have in dev because this might operate over hot module reloading better. But then all of this work here, that's just a set up the sync between them. So if we do a little tweak here, and rather than passing in a doc, we can quick memo this. Const doc equals use memo. And then same deal, no dependencies, set up a doc, return said doc. It is returning them in an array. We don't need to do this. This empty array here means that it's only going to run on mount. So what we've done here now is, actually we could just simplify this to this. Effectively, we have the same setup now. But we still don't have that. If we look at the flow, what does our flow look like? How are they getting the flow to actually update? App. Oh, there's a flow. Okay, we were looking at app. Yep. So these are the helper functions for layout. We were looking at app. App is the thing that's setting up the doc. That doc is then being passed to the flow. So our flow is the thing that's actually rendering it. So if we look here, how is that? Yeah. Use effect. I mean, I feel like use sync external store would work too. I don't know why it's not. Which is honestly a little frustrating, but I am at that point where I'm okay just doing this. So it's saying set nodes, and then we have a subscriber. Why is there a set timeout? That's interesting. Okay. Like, what if we just do this? Let's get rid of this use sync external store, and we'll just go with this. All right, and now if we add, nothing's updating. Okay. This should be adding in NA. And all we're doing is interesting. So the use effect is going to run when doc changes. In this case, doc is memoed. It's memoed at a different level though. If so, like that might matter with the components. So this is calling a docs.subscribe, and then it's returning to do unsubscribe. Yeah, so like it seems like they don't actually have an unsubscribe with it. So if they put an unsubscribe built into the subscribe function, then we could use the use sync external store. If we want to keep it purely React plus this, then that's what we would have to do, I think. Then more use effects also with the doc. So if any of those things change, then we do that. I don't know. I'm not convinced that doc is actually doing anything. So if we say like boop. I'm not convinced that having in that dependency array is actually doing anything. Because this, like a very simple example, like when use effect runs, that should force a re-render. Right. Whoop. We want to keep that open. We want to keep this open. API reference, components, hooks. So that, I mean, it should be triggering an update every time, right? So anytime the dependencies change, it's going to fire off an effect in the background, and it doesn't really. After every re-render of every component where the dependencies have changed. So if this changes, then it will re-render. What if we do the list? Yeah, so there's definitely other things happening in here. Like having it in the doc or having it in the dependency array is fine, but I don't think that's the piece that's actually changing. We have a whole bunch of use effect doc get list. So this is the thing getting the nodes, and then this mutates. I'm guessing it's mutating. Where is set nodes? Oh, it's setting state. Use edge state. Oh, so it's changing those hooks. I don't like it. So I think that's the. It's going to make things a little bit difficult because we basically need this with an so this needs to like return an unsubscribe. But it's not. And we can't actually like put it in there because it needs to be embedded into it. I guess we could just say, like, can we just trick it? Is it just I've never tried to jerk React before. So if we have a memo doc and we have a snapshot, I don't really care about that snapshot per se, but I also don't really want to use any of those. So if we say a list dot subscribe, it can do whatever it wants. But it just needs to return a function. And list.subscribe. So it's going to call this every time, right? How does that work? If it needs to return so if the subscribe needs to return an unsubscribe, how is it actually watching it? It should subscribe to the story and return. So there's some like observable something or other that it's expecting. I don't think we're going to be able to get this to work with Loro stuff out of the box. So like I think the only way we can actually do work with this is like even the use effect wasn't working, which is unfortunate. Like their use of use effect just there's so much mutating happening that it just happens to re-render it enough. So you know that's a thing. Use effect. So if we do a dependency array and we say doc, if every time we see the doc change, what if we say a list dot insert? Like that would theoretically, that would be an infinite loop, right? So if we click this button, we're not getting any re-renders. So I don't like, because part of this is if we log out, so if we just do like a console.log on list and doc, it's not a, like this is probably something that's not stable. So how can it tell if it changed or not? I'm guessing that's like what's happening is it's doing like a shallow comparison for use effect in the dependency right here, and it's seeing nothing changed, so like we don't need to re-render. But why doesn't const boop equals list dot to JSON? But I guess like that's going to be like that doesn't actually work either. Because you need like a static value. I mean, I could pass in a snapshot. What if we just do a function view? We've got a doc, and then we take all of this, put it here. This gives us a doc. And it is this type doc. And then also we want a snapshot. So then this is going to be a return view, and we have a doc. And then we want like a snapshot of it. So having to serialize it every time is kind of annoying. We'll definitely want to, I mean, there's definitely going to be some level of serialization because we need to take information out of it to inspect it. Well, not to inspect it. We need to pull information out of the state to be able to render it. So there's going to be some like level of serialization in here anyways. How do we do that? If we look at let's look at the list. Is that what we're using now? Yeah, we're using the list. So when we have inserts and deletes, and then it's literally just calling 2D-JSON and everything. And like, I guess this is where the why performance on encode and decode is potentially a big deal, because if you're doing these operations this often, it starts to add up. So if we do this and we say doc bytes is a uint array, it is a export mode, and we'll say a snapshot. And this needs to be this there. So now the doc that's coming in, and then the snapshot will maybe force a re-render snapshot. Dot. Oh. Okay. So there's our snapshot. And this is our actual like state. So if we do add, yeah, it's still not actually causing a re-render. So there's the like, even if we do const doc equals new Loro doc, and we comment that piece out right there, there's nothing forcing a re-render. So I think this really, like, there's a reason that especially libraries that are like corporate / VC backed will put the time into making the hooks, because if they can say, hey, user library, here's a hook, React is, it's everywhere at this point, right? So it's kind of an easy win when you can just pull in and you don't have to make your own hook. And that's kind of what we're running into here, is that we need our own hook for it. So there's not an easy or nice way to pull it in. And that, I guess that's something too, like, we did, well, I guess it's not that. On stream, we did a tiny base. This was a while ago. In some ways, it's like, well, why would you use this and not just use something directly? It has support for like YJS or AutoMerge. Why not just use those directly? This is why. if it is going to help us out in implementing and potentially setting up the persist feature and wiring it up and giving us hooks for all these pieces, calling something like this and then using a hook is much easier. There is, so they got some like React bits, or they have some like high level, more vanilla JS ish, but then they also have React hooks for it. So where's the store? Use cell. So, but like, Tiny Base is very much built around, we are rendering a database in a nice way. is what it feels like. And you can kind of see that from the hooks that they supply, which is fine. There's definitely use cases for that. So if we do in our view, we're doing a doc, and then we have a use effect, which is listening to said doc. What if we do something like we have one more layer in here and we say function item. I don't know if we're going to actually be able to get a re-render out of this, but P or actually we'll do this. And instead of actually doing the JSON, we'll say list JSON. And this is what we're going to pass in here. And maybe this will end up forcing that re-render. Oh. And we want to do it like this. There we go. Okay. Oof. All right. Struggling a little bit here. We're brain's getting tired, I guess. So now if we do something like this, and this should take a list JSON, of which now if we say const list JSON equals list.toJSON, there. So anytime we click the button, we're pushing. Still nothing. So like what React is doing for its comparison with however these objects or whatever data structure these are, however they're built up, it doesn't seem to sense that as changing. Like even when we call so if we call list JSON, let's do a console.log list JSON. This is, so it's called twice. If we click add, see it's not calling it again because it's like hard coded here. So if we do list.to JSON, is that going to change every time? Yeah, so something's like really sticky. Because we're running a snapshot, and snapshot's not changing. Like nothing is changing when we click this. I guess maybe this is the other bit. Let's make sure that we're actually doing a list.push. What is list.push? It is synchronous and it returns void. So if we do a set peer, here's some pushes. So it's just doing that. That's a get movable list. I don't know how much that matters, but I don't think you have to set the peer ID either. But I guess we'll find out. Oh, I guess the other thing is technically we need to commit it, right? Do they do that in this example? So we have this, we set some things, we push. They don't do anything with commits. So I don't think we have to actually, I don't think we actually have to commit. Because we're doing, it's kind of weird that they're like wrapping this. I feel like that makes it awkward to read. But doc B, Loro from snapshot. So this is starting a new instance from the other one. So we have two in the same state with different peer IDs by the time we reach this point. So you have list A and list B. Do we actually need anything else? So this, there is also the knit. It's entirely possible that we need an init somewhere. It's either happening here or part of our init. We've got in our plugins, we've got WASM and top level 08. I guess we could be pretty confident that it's initialized because we've got, I mean, like, there's this. So I would think that it's something is initialized and working. So then if we do an insert, we should be able to see that. But it's weird that we're not getting. If you can, well, I mean, this is pretty neat. They're using JSON schema. So interesting. It's just calling it at any point. Okay, so if we just do something inline like that, so we do a list.insert. And we'll do one more, ABCD, and we'll put that at 3. And then we'll push once we click the button. It shouldn't show that fourth one, right? Technically, like this rendered twice. So that's partly React strict mode, I believe. But it's rendering ABCD, ABCD. And we're getting this because we're rendering it. Okay, that makes sense. ABC and ABC, ABCD. Okay. So that makes sense because ABCD here is from the previous render, and then the second render is here. So by the time we log out, this state only considers the previous 3. It's not including this one. So this is then like a static value. But now if we click add, that should be actually like this is getting called, right? Hello, chat. It's almost like this is not actually getting called, which is weird. It's definitely getting called. And it's definitely doing a list.push. Let's do we'll put it right in the front. Welp. So it's logging it. It's completing. But then we just don't get the re-render. All right. So, I mean, what's happening here, and the reason it's re-rendering is because we're listening to set nodes and set edges, both of which are state that are coming from another hook. So, like, the reason this is re-rendering is because it's like resetting the state. So like in theory we can do something sort of the similar, but JSON version JSON Loro doc set JSON doc goes use state null is fine, and now we can say set JSON doc to be list.toJSON, and then this just ends up being this. And type error, whatever, it'll work. So this is the, like, if you want to use a global state thing and you don't want to use the use state, you need to figure out how to get React to re-render. I think like functionally React expects you to use the use sync external store, but it doesn't seem like they've got a hook set up to fit nicely into what React expects. Which might be fine for some use cases, but it is also a little bit annoying if you're just trying to wire it up directly. I think everything else in here ends up being pretty much in line with what else we've seen. There is, let's see. I guess something with their subscribe. If we subscribe to the doc, we would be able to emit events. But it is only emitted after a micro task, so you have to keep that in mind a little bit. But we could do something generically like this, where it is, we're not actually setting the state here, but instead we say, like we could in theory do something like this. If we say set JSON doc and just say, why are you complaining? Oh, an arc, sure. List dot to JSON. So like every time there's a change in the doc, just like reset it, which will work, but also we're kind of abusing these bits. So we're getting the pushes, and now are we seeing console.log event? What's that subscribe doing? Doc subscribe to changes. So if we subscribe to doc, we should see all changes to doc. That actually might be different from list. So these might be like that nesting might actually be considered. It isn't. So list is changing. We are changing it here, and we've in theory subscribed. If we do use effect, I wonder if there's some like it's happening multiple times kind of situation. So empty array, because we only want it to happen on first mount, is not actually calling set at all. We're not getting this at all. .log established. Yeah, so it's definitely firing. The subscribe is definitely not fitting well into our expectations on, or at least what React is expecting. And there is some level of like, you have to commit to actually get the event. So it could be if we do a doc commit, then it would fire. Yeah. So now we're basically just duplicating state, which doesn't feel great. But we're doing it in a way that is when React sees use state change, then it knows to re-render. So unless we give React a way to know when to re-render, it's not actually going to re-render. It's going to no op every time. So unless we're doing something, which I think is probably going to be the use sync external store as a way to subscribe to it, we're not going to see these things update. There's potentially like places where you could hook it up in other global state libraries that have some hooks that have some of this stuff written. Like if we look at use what would that be called? Reselect. Reselect is what React Redux uses. And if we look at like their hook implementation, hopefully we can find it here real quick. This is a selector creator. Auto track memorize. Yeah, like they've got their whole own built-in memoization, which I don't want to have to write that, like these kind of bits for every for every app that needs to use this. So it kind of shows the importance of, or maybe not the importance, but the reason that many of these libraries end up doing hooks, because they're low level enough where you can use it and it can be very flexible, but also implementing it is sort of a not fun time. But it also sucks that we're in a situation where every one of these libraries needs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different hooks for every implementation. Luckily, those probably don't change too much, but like that ends up then being the way that the users are interacting with your library, which means you have to be adept at multiple frameworks to do that well. Okay, where is the I thought I would be able to find it real quick here. Types selector. So here's a selector. Oh, those are all types. Memoize, create selector. Is that, maybe that comes from React Redux? Oh, React Redux. Hooks, use selector. Here we go. Okay. So this is using reselect, and it has a hook established specifically to work with a selector, which is the thing that use select, or excuse me, the thing that reselect returns. So it's doing use callback, which with a whole bunch of stuff. And then here, yeah, use sync external store. So the subscription add, where's the subscription come in? From your Redux context. So like there's some level of like, you need to do some things to get it to work nicely. And this use sync external store is probably going to be the way that it should be done with React. But it seems like they haven't actually implemented that yet, which is why they have the use effect. So like baby steps, but also I think if that subscription is tweaked, I think you're going to use the use sync external store directly, and then it wouldn't be too bad. But still, you're then doing a snapshot for every time you want to grab any piece of the data. So you have to be very specific about like, you're subscribing to this piece of the data You can make it work. I think if this subscription would be tweaked, I think you can make it work. Um, and I imagine that other frameworks are going to be in the same situation where, like, if you're doing this in Vue, you might have to tweak how you implement it. I mean, you will tweak how you implement it, but like, putting it in there might run into similar situations where we have to play around with stuff a little bit. I think that's probably the end of where we want to like look at stuff here. We got a little bit of an example, at least as much as we could with what we were working with. I'm not a huge fan of the use effect or the other thing that we had set up, but like React doesn't seem to be able to work off of however the state is configured to be able to understand that it needs to re-render. So I think you have to use sync external store to just get React to actually re-render, which is a thing. Everything else, though, I mean, the cursor and the time travel and the persistence, like, it has a lot of the bits. I think if the ecosystem comes along a little bit more, I think this is going to end up being really nice. Whoops. Missed a little bit of translation there. Because like it has the stuff that I think it needs to have, and like this is again like the parts that YJS are sort of ahead on. I mean, you look at their ecosystem. This is in some ways like the competition. Like this, it has React hooks. It has Immer. Well, the Immer implementation is a little awkward, but like it has a whole bunch of bindings to the like text type editing. YJS PS PDF kit. Interesting. So like you can kind of just use this out of the box with their hooks, which is kind of it's a big way to get onboarded. And then there's all the providers and whatnot. So like if we wanted to do sync of Loro, we need Y WebSocket and Y WebRTC, the equivalents at least. In theory, you could potentially use some of this code. Like if you just need a signaling server that passes code between, it might not take too much work to do, but also like none of this is off the shelf. So you have the base pieces that you need, and then you have to build everything else off the shelf. Like you are building the shelf and then putting the things on the shelf and building those, which makes for a really nice setup. Or it can lead to a very nice looking setup, but it also means that it's a lot more effort than just running this. So something to be said. I'm liking where everything's going though, and I'm liking the feel of it. It feels very much in the vent of or in the vein of like this is a potential alternative to YJS, but the ecosystem isn't nearly far enough to compete with the ecosystem of YJS. I do think they have some interesting bits though, and it's kind of interesting that they're doing. If we look at again their README, where they're pulling inspiration from, I think there's some interesting setups and use cases for it, and I hope that it continues to expand, and I hope that the ecosystem comes along for it too, because I think this definitely does hold a lot of water. But until then, if you're pulling this in, you'll have to be prepared to do a little bit of your own custom binding type code. The glue code is gonna it's gonna take a little effort to write yourself, but all the bits feel like they're there. I think that's probably where we're gonna call it. I really wish my to-do app was cooperating a little bit more. I'll have to tweak some of the drag and drops and the build. I felt like I was so close that I could just run it without having to do this. But there's some like OS level error when it tries to start up. I think it's looking for the icon for the like this icon right here, and I might have just not made one, and the default wasn't working. I don't know. We'll have to deal with it. But speaking of dealing with it, the next time we stream next week, I've got it scheduled already. So head on over and click the button to get notified for it. We're gonna try to wire up some WebSockets into it, and we might end up running into or otherwise fixing some of these bugs that we noticed. And the reason we want WebSockets is because then I can have that reach into my streaming software and grab the like current timestamp. So right now I'm just saving the time, which means you have to deal with daytime, which is unfortunate. But if I could just get direct timestamps, that will make my life a little bit easier. So that would be nice. But then like wiring up WebSockets is just kind of interesting, and we're doing it in the like within Tori. So there's lots of like interesting bits we can dive into. So I hope this was helpful. Hopefully you gained some insight out of us going through Loro. It seems very promising, and I would love to see the ecosystem evolve a little bit more. And maybe a couple more of these like little pieces or hooks, and we can sneak it into other places or other code bases that we got. But until then, have a great rest of your week. Happy Tuesday, I guess. See you next week for some WebSockets, which we've been planning for and promising for like weeks. But things kept coming up with the app. But that's where we're at. We'll make it happen next week. Bye.